Başlayabiliriz Emrah.
Çok teşekkürler Defne. Evet, öncelikle herkese tekrar iyi akşamlar. Kaos GL'nin eşit haklar için savunuculuğu güçlendirme projesi kapsamında sosyal hizmetler alanında gerçekleştirilen etkinliklerin dördüncüsünde bulunuyoruz bugün. Bugün erkek seks işçilerine dönük sosyal hizmet konusunda Hans yeniden bizimle. Takip edebilenlerin hatırlayacağı gibi bundan önceki buluşmada cinsel şiddetten hayatta kalan erkeklere dönük sosyal hizmet konusunda bizlerleydi. Gerek bu ve önceki buluşmalara Kaos'un YouTube kanalından da erişilebilir. Ufak bir hatırlatma olarak da Hans, tekrar takdim etmek isterim. İsveç'te sosyal hizmet üzerine üniversitelerde ders veriyor. Sosyal hizmet üzerine hem akademik hem de uygulamacı olarak 40 yılı aşkın bir zamandır emek veriyor İsveç'te ve uluslararası alanda. Şu anda araştırmaların odağı daha çok kültürel, tarihsel olarak sosyal hizmet, cinsellik ve özellikle erkeklerin kırılganlıkları. Yakın zamanda da Cinsellik ve Sosyal Hizmetler adlı bir kitabı yayımlandı. Sevgili Hans, bugün üzerine düşünme fırsatı bulacağımız sorular temel olarak şu şekilde özetle. Birincisi, partnerlik ilişkisi kapsamında cinsel şiddete maruz kalan, erkek tecavüzüne uğrayan erkeklere ya da erkek seks işçilerine dönük sosyal hizmetler derken nelerden bahsedebiliyoruz? Erkekler bu alanlarda hangi türden şiddete maruz bırakılıyor? Bu alana dönük anlayışı hangi teorik çerçevede güçlendirebilir ve çalışmaların dayanağı ne olabilir? Bir de sosyal hizmet uzmanları olarak şiddete dayalı bir olguyu insan hakları perspektifini kullanarak nasıl değiştirebilir ve dönüştürebiliriz? Şimdi biraz sonra sözü Hans'a vereceğim ama kısa bir hatırlatma olarak da bu etkinlik Avrupa Birliği'nin desteklediği eşit haklar için savunuculuğu güçlendirme projesi kapsamında yapılıyor ve etkinliğin içeriği ve etkinlikte konuşulanların AB'nin resmi görüşünü yansıttığı anlamına gelmediğini hatırlatmak isteriz. Ve sevgili Hans, buyurun.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. Well, I'm in Sweden and you're in Turkey, and this is a lovely night in Sweden. So, and I also thank you very much to Kaos to invite me, and to Murat and everybody who has done all this work for getting me on the screen. So today I will talk about men and violence and social work out of a perspective of being selling sex, a male sex worker. And so I was the first talk a little bit about the research I based on, some theoretical views, and then I will have discussed this case as a case study, and out of that I will have some reflection on how to do this social work, and all of that include in a way which I feel is a human right perspective, because we have to take care of every person in the society in the world. So let me first introduce the study. Please change the slide. Do you see a slide? There comes the slide. This is the first slide, and it's a research study, and I follow a sex worker in different venues, like from brothel, escorts, agency, private business, and I did that for 10 years. I did some seminar, 8 semi-structured qualitative interviews, and informal conversation, ethnographic fieldworks, and I also got access to his own personal diary. And after 4 years, I also followed up this research. So in the last, down there is the reference to the article, and in the article, there's also reference to a lot of this research I will refer to. Please do the next one. And this will be based on the cultural historical activity theory. And that is Vygotsky, Lenyovsky, and Luria's heritage. And it's the thing is that they say, what is how do people meet? How do we meet the environment. It's through activity. Like now, I'm meeting you through this lecture. Without this lecture, I will not meet you and you will not meet me. So it had to be an activity for us to meet and also to meet in the environment. So every activity, like going to school, doing work, doing leisure time, being a family, then we develop as a person. And it's changed and remodeled and developed through years to go. So the more number of different kind of activities, organization we attend, things we are involved in, we expand ourselves. So we expand by expanding. So if we're talking, there's two sides to these activities, like it's both developing our personality and socializing. So when we walk in an activity, we expand ourselves, our own personality. But at the same time, the society dwells in us, settles in us. So that is the socialization. The more venues, the more activities we walk into, the more socialized we become. So please, next slide, please. So it also theoretical from the cultural historical activity theory, see people as active subjects. They're not objects, they're active subjects, and they're able to change. They change the environment around them. We changed the world with the artifacts we do, but at the same time, we change the world. We also change inside ourselves. So when we do this, when we enter like into course or university, or we go to organization or political things or religious things, we all make experience, and through those experience, we build our self-image, our personality, but we also socialized. So in this, like being in academic or university, becoming a social worker, this is an activity, but that activity will have a demanding structure, and we learn how to deal with demanding structure as an action competence. We develop an action competence which have a survival value. And so in the more activities we are in, the more demanding structures we are, the more action competence we get. And then maybe we don't need them, but then they are in laying still and ready to be used next time. Like if you bicycle, you learn how to do bicycling, but then you don't have to bicycle for 5-10 years. But when you take up the bicycle again, you can do it because it has been there and you mobilize it. So please take this next slide. So let me go back to Ethan. And he was, if you start with his childhood, he, as a person, was in the terminated Mediterranean and androgynous appearance, something he could use in sex selling business because he was not very sure to be a male or a female, and he was kind of very soft in his face. His parents divorced when he was 8. His mother took care of him and a grandmother, and they were very caring. His father comes from an honor-related society, quite harsh. So also around this time when the divorce, he was raped by his uncle, and that experience haunted him. He could never come over it, and I thought that was one of the reasons why he started selling sex, because at the same time it was a haunting experience. It was also something saying he was special selected. And this rape, he also had it twice more time when he was 19 and 25, when we talked about it last time, how you could be really beaten, you could go to death. But he had a thing that, well, please come quickly, don't hurt me, and leave. And this rape was not done in his working sex, it was in a private sex. So we also have to take that with us when we're talking further in the social work. Often we relate to the sex worker in the sex working activity and forget their private activity. He was very early in having sex, so he started when he was 10, and when he was 14 years old in a toilet in a park, he was penetrated by the boy, and that hurt him really bad. So that experience made him to have no anal sex all his life. And that is a thing for a reminder what bad sexual experience is in childhood. As a social worker or health worker, or also for human rights, we should have not only a social welfare, but also a sexual welfare, where we create very safe environment for young people to become healthy as a sexual persons without any threat. Because of this, his mother had a lot of different boyfriends and he couldn't stand them. So the social service gave him an apartment and he lived by himself. So he was out and he tried to find people to have sex with, and he found it at the internet. And there was one man offering him 200 euro, a bottle of liquor and cartoon for some sex. And that was the starting point for him to have sex. So he continued with that, and back and forth, going in school, and when he needs some money or clothes, he sold sex. So that is also a thing that it's not only in sex selling business, it's not only money all the time, it's also gift. Like he get liquor and cigarette, but he could also get money, or he could he get like clothes, he could travel, and he get things. So we often think about sex work as an economic with money, but it's also something bigger with that. And when he was 18, he started to find around, settle down, and he got a boyfriend in 20. And I decided I want to do the world, or at least Europe. So I started to plan how to do Europe during the summer, travel around, and I needed money. So he said to his boyfriend that, well, can we do either we sell sex or we do a sex show? And his boyfriend thought a sex show was better. So he and his boyfriend have sex and invited men to look at them. And then I got the money for the tour, and I went down. So let's have a little break here and think about, in research about men who sell sex, what is the vulnerability of what put them in this situation? Please turn the slide. In research, there's at least 3 tiers of vulnerability. The first one is from the domestic sphere, at the result of boy leaving home and entering the street. And in a way, Ethan was doing that due to, not because his mother was bad or his grandmother, but the boyfriend she had made it impossible for him to stay there. So he moved out. And in Sweden, a young boy or girl can't live on the street. So you have to have a social service to give you a room. But otherwise, it could be on the street. So having a bad domestic problem often force the young man out in the street. The second tier of vulnerability is the unprotected street living, where they are abused in different kind of child labor and used in different kind of work or criminality and so on. And one of these will be selling sex. And the third is the tiers of vulnerability that the research talk about, is this multiple level that of sexual and economic exploitation is both sex selling, trafficking, pornography, traveling, and tourism. It's all mixed together because it's a sex industry. So, and I find in my research two major reasons of getting onto street. And on the next slide, please. I have interviewed young men who have been having experienced honor violence and oppression. And Nassif, he says here, you can read it there, you work to buy food like milk, eggs, and so on. After you have eaten, what happens? They gather together like garbage. What do you do with the garbage? Or who is responsible for them? Who reminds the family of throwing the garbage? The person in charge, the mother or the father. Who's responsible for throwing the garbage collected on the street? Ultimately, the government. If somebody in the family doesn't throw away the garbage, what happens? First, the family force the family to do so. If not, the neighbors will notify the police, and in the end, the government. I am just like garbage for them in Iran. They look at me as garbage. Even if one person has treaties with me, others can't forgive me. I can have a value on life only if I think I'm not garbage. For example, in my country and for the people there, being gay means being a nothing. Being gay is just being goofy. Gay, that means a dangerous thing in my home country. My family, they believe in this and take responsibility for removing garbage from the home. So me, but I am their child. Why should I kill me? Because I think I'm wrong. So Nassif, he was actually had to run away from his home because the parents and family found out he was gay. And by running out, he was on the street and without any more economic supply, he had to do some sex work. So this honor related on the family and the extended family and the society hounds the people, young people, to go in one way. Not all of them, but one can do that, as Nassif, as I have been interviewed. Another one is, we change the slide, is Jamal. And he says also in the interview I had with him, my relationship to my dad is pretty bad, even before he found out that I was gay. So he liked to harass me, bully me, and hit me. Everything since I was born. When I was 17, that's when he found out. He didn't fully find out I was gay. He only suspected I was gay. What happened is that he came back home one day and he came pushing me, kicking me. He broke my bones. My face was totally bleeding. Everything was so bad. Everything hurts. I was sent to the hospital. My body, my hand, my face was bleeding. He kept hitting me, assaulting me, and my mom was only crying. He kept insulting. Was he kicking you to defeat you? Hans said. Yes. He said I was insulting him, calling me a faggot, gay, that I brought shame to the family and stuff. Yeah. I had long hair before. I didn't have beard or anything. I was young. He shaved me. He came to my room after he hit me in the floor. He went and bought a machine and he shaved over my head. He shaved over my hair and he kept me grounded for 3 years. Yes, for 3 years. I never left the house for 3 years. I was in my room, not even the house, only my room. I was only allowed to go out to the toilet and go back to my room. My dad told me, if we were in Jordan, I would have killed you and buried you under the ground without people knowing because you brought shame to the family. So this is a very totalitarian family due to keep the norms and the standard of a family in shape. So what he's doing when he's coming to Sweden with the family, his parents do the same thing again. They lock him into the room, but he suddenly escaped. And then I could do the interview and then he's lost. And I don't know today if he's dead or not, because I haven't heard anything since the follow-up half a year after I interviewed him. But at that time, he had to sell sex in order to live. So these are the things that makes young people go out and force them to sell sex. Why do I say that? Because we have to charge the discrimination and stigmatization. Because the stigmatization to be gay, the stigmatization to be LGBTI person, and that is something that force in family, in society, in groups, and that is a violation of the human right perspective. Please take next slide. And what kind of violence do we see? We have physical, as cut the hair, he hit them, and all the things. We have the mental, the harassment, the bullying, the non-recognition, the misrecognition. We have the symbolic, when you construct the reality in a way, in this family, this organization, and this religious movement, whatever, you have to be this and this way. This is how the world look like. No, it's in your word. It's the word we have to think about the whole world, United Nations and the human rights perspective. And the structural and social sexualized violence is like the hate crime, homophobic violence, unfair legislation says you can't do that. So if we're going to do something for the individual, we have to do something with the society and the group they're living to. Please, next slide. Why is this very important? Because, as we said in the theoretical, every activity you go into, you enhance, develop your self-image, and also you socialize. So Nassif say, in the past, I thought it was me. In the heart, for example, I liked a guy, but my thought said it's wrong. Everybody tells me it's wrong. God tells me it's wrong. My family tells me it's wrong. Everyone in the family tells me it's wrong. That's why I also think it's wrong with me. Maybe I'm wrong. In my country, for example, I can't hug a guy, kiss a guy, because then people will kill me. That's why I think it's wrong with me. But when I come here, and that is the organization in Sweden, it's called Homan, who is for young gay people with an ethnic background. And I meet other gay people who have experienced the same thing as me. I understand slowly I feel that I'm not wrong, because there are other people just like me. And this is something that really had a dark side of feeling I am wrong. My self-image, God, society, my family, and even myself. And how do I deal with that? The ultimately is I kill myself. Or I get very bad physical health. So, and that is also an aim for social work, to help people to have a good mental health in the society. And then we have to see what kind of activities young people getting their self-image from, and how are they socialized, and how can I be becoming a full democratic person. Please do the next slide. So let's go back to Ethan again. He settles down in a major European city by selling sex, because his boyfriend goes back to Sweden and do his school. And so he is stuck in one main town in Europe without any money, and he find out that next door is a brothel. So he goes there and said, well, I want to work, and he got to work, and he found money so he can get a little room, and then he start to do some studying. And then he started to establish himself in the town with the support of selling sex. He's going to school. He's meeting his friend. He's doing some music, and occasionally he's selling sex for it. So he also try to do something with escorting. And to mention the difference, it is the brothel is like where he worked. It was on the second floor, and you have a safe door, and there's a guard going in there, and there's a dim light, and the boy stands around, and the customer comes in, and then he can choose a boy, or a boy could go choose him. And if they find an agreement, they pay something to the bartender, and they go upstairs a room, and then they have sex. And the customer could tip the boy before he leave, but he can't leave the establishment before the boy says it's okay. So it's a really safety thing. Ethan felt safe on the brothel. And in that case, he can also think about his health, not only the sexual health using a condom, but also his mental and physical health. When he was in escorting, he belonged to a firm, had a website, and on the website it's like a drink menu. You can choose, well, you want to have one who is insertive, or is the one who is passive, or is both way, versatile, or you can have Spanish looking or old looking, or you can have a thin one, a long one, a leather one, or whatever, and you can choose whatever. And then you get into this organization, and I accept you. So Ethan says well, they phoned me and said, okay, we drive up a taxi for you. Now you are from Spanish, you are 25 years old, you like to do this and this and this, and the taxi dropped him off at the address. He do the sex work, and the taxi take him back, up and goes back. And so he said, I was just like an object. I didn't have any, I was not in charge of anything. And doing that, he also didn't have any charge of his life and his health and being secure. He was like stripped of all dignity. After a couple of years, he set up his own business with a website, and he had a contact. It was a lot of work, of course, but then he felt that he was in charge. So the thing is, I found out in research, and what also things are in other research, is like either you are a victim or you are not in charge. But the thing is that Ethan, he's sometimes in charge and sometimes he's a victim, depending on the circumstances and the activity and the demanding structure in that activity. So it's not like we are either or, but we are both, depending on what kind of activity we are. So as a social worker, we have to think, what kind of activity is this man working in? A lot of working class or street guys who has been thrown out work as a street hustler. Some of the middle class that work inside in brothels, and some of the higher up will work just very hidden. So it depends on what activity we are in, how we feel, how we are in charge, and how we get further. And that is also, as I said in the beginning, about being in charge about selling sex as a working sex or as a private sex. Ethan, he got HIV positive when he was 22, and that was not as a working. It was when he was with his private lover. And the thing is, and that is also in a lot of research, that when you are in a sex selling business, you are very cautious about taking care of yourself and taking HIV. But when you are in a loving relation, you lower your guard and you think this is love and that nothing could happen to them. And then you get raped or you get HIV and you are open for abuse. So as a social worker, we have to think both at the sex selling activity and the private life activity and enhance both. You have to be safe, you have to take care of yourself, and you have to have both mentally and physically going along. So he found his love, and he a man from Africa, and he think this is the best. So he, he quit the sex selling and go down to South Africa and marry the man who has a son, and then move into his village in another country. And it's good for a month, but then he become the wife, and the boyfriend he knew from Europe suddenly become the man, and start hitting him and demanding him. He locked him into the little house, the shed he was living in. Because in that context, in the family there, two men could live, but not as two men. The gender division between them had to be that one was a woman and the other man is a man. So again, he had to fly and run away from there back to Europe without anything. And then he had this mobilized, so he knew how to sell sex. And that was the one who he could start over once more. So please have the next slide. So what we can say about this is that's a reciprocal relationship between the external structure of sex selling activity and Ether's inner experience of being agent or victim, and that affecting his perception of health and well-being. When he's feeling charged in his life, he is more likely to take care of his health and his social and economic future. And Leontief, he says, acting on the external world, they change it. And at the same time, they also change themselves. So when he are able as an agent, he also become an agent for himself. When he become a victim, he victimized himself. So please, next slide. An example on this is from the Derek Hodge, who has studied the sex work in Havana in Cuba. And he found that in 1992, there was only a tiny number of male sex workers. And then Cuba opened up for the United States dollar, and also the casino and the tourists from the States and Spain came. And in 1999, there was about 500 Cuban male sex workers. And it was connected to this new capitalism economic. Before that, there was a bugaron. That was the active insertive male, and it was a macaron, the receptive. That both disappeared. And after legalization of dollar, it started a new word was introduced, the pinguero. Ping is slang for dick in Spanish. So it was one who used his dick. And I thought, this is something that could represent the strength of a powerful Cuban phallus conquering the body of the foreigner. So the number and how they perceive the sex selling men depended on the cultural historical activity and how the context was formed. And so when we in social work, not only with sex worker or with men raped by men or other stigmatized and so on people, it has to do with how the society is formed and the norms and what kind of like hegemonic masculinities there are. So please, the next one. So we found out that the sex selling activities embedded in a larger social structure with orchestra, standards, and documents of the business, making sex selling shameful, stigmatizing, and visible. Many sex workers are exposed to two society's taboos, namely commercial sex and homosexual activities, but they also work in the sector that is damned of most society. And that means a lot, because this shame that Ethan experienced and being in a sex worker made that he could never talk to his mother or his family or other friends that he was selling sex. So he could never receive any help or have any strength or what in his choice of life and help with his life, since he had to hide this part of his life. And as at time, the part of selling sex was more than the whole time he did. Sometimes it was just part-time, but sometimes it was the whole life. So he had to stay out of sight, under the radar for the family and so on. And then he could not benefit for being in the family. So it's being in a shameful surrounding, in shameful activities, that we have to address them. And that is what also Gayle Rubin's mean between blessed and shameful areas. Let's have a look at the next slide. This is inspired from Gayle Rubin's, and she has talked about the sex hierarchy in the society. And maybe you can't really see this. It's very, very small, but in the middle, when it's white, it's supposed to be white there. I point there and you can maybe see. Is a charm circle. I mean, it's blessed. Then you are heterosexual, then you are married, then you're monogamous, then you are it's non-commercial, it's in pairs, in relationships, and so on. The outside, that is the damned sexuality. That is homosexual, that is unmarried, that's promiscuous, non-procreational, commercial, in groups, casual, cross-generational, anal, pornography, sadomasochism with objects. So when we think about this, and actually Gayle Rubin is doing this like a cone, like this. So this, the blessed area is up here and the damned area is down. So that is, and mostly we, in social work, we work with the damned areas, with people who are in the red light district areas. But that means that to put in those activities, in the damned activities from society, is stigmatizing, because there's a border between them, that you are not blessed, you're not procreators, you're homosexual, you're doing this for money, we're not doing this for money, etc. So next slide, please. So if we look at the sex selling activity, we could see it's accumulating over time. And sometimes it's a part-time, sometimes intermittent, and sometimes a main source of income. And in that way, the men selling sex is a little different from women, because men often go back and forth from selling sex. And many women go into the sex industry and stay there, where men goes in and out. And so it also would be like a support for doing something else. Like when Ethan, he was doing his university study, he didn't need any sex selling, because he got his money from Sweden when you study at university, even if you study abroad. So then he was supported. But then when he didn't do that, when he got HIV and got sick, he actually have to do something for getting money. So please, next one. So after 10 years, he wrote me an email and he said, how do you leave prostitution? Basically, it's about finding a new job and leaving the old. Nothing strange, but still incredibly difficult, much harder than I had other projects in life. Why is now that I have a long period of sex work. I have a harder time being social now than I had before. Difficult to trust people and harder to trust that I'm good enough to do more than sex. I have successfully reduced contact with friends I had before, partly because I'm ashamed, I feel insecure. Without even a social network, I have less chance of finding a new job, apartment. Everything in life is heavy without friends. I feel unsociable in comparison how I have been. And here's some nice thoughts Ethan writes. He says, it's about finding a new job and leaving the old. There's nothing strange, but it's incredible difficulty. And we come back to that because I introduced the notion of social capital. And he will also say it's harder to, he has reduced his contacts with friends since he's doing more sex work. And also he has less social network. So let's look at the next page. So I will introduce social capital, and out of is Bourdieu and others have dealt with this, and it's been from the society level down, and this is on a personal level, like a person in the environment. And she says, Lynn, is a resources embedded in a social structure which are accessed or mobilized in a purposive action. That means that when I have a social capital, which could be economic and so on, I maybe belong to a family. That is my social capital. Because if I don't have any work, and then I go to my father and say, I need some money. Maybe I need a car, and I say, can I borrow the car, Dad? It's a social capital because I know these people. Or it's a gang, it's a group, it's an organization. When I need it, I get something. Or a little village on the rural area. When I need a tractor, I get one. When I need some help with the cow, I get it. But the other side of it is that it's closed. You get along, but you don't get ahead. So you will always have food, you will always have something, a roof over your head, but there is no other possibility and what's in the social capital group. And you see, this ego, that means Ethan. And Ethan, he has these strong bounds, or strong ties that is bounding to his group. And he also have that is kind of family group or group of friends. And then he had this sex selling industry, which is above. The linking, the weak ties, that is when you know somebody who makes a job. You haven't known that person before, but you know somebody who said, well, oh, I know somebody who needs somebody to work with, or, oh, I could introduce you to this. Who gives you an opportunity? Say, oh, I know there's an empty flat or something. So that gives you a head. And the thing is here that due to how much you have social capital, as he had in the beginning, he has his family, he has his friend, he has his university studies, he goes back and forth. And so he has both of these groups and he can get ahead. But then when he get entirely into the sex selling activity, and he meet a man there, and he said, well, I need a job. That man can't take him to his job because he works it in shameful. And what do you say? Well, it come to selling Volvo cars. Oh, I have a nice young man here who wants a job. He has been in a sex selling business. No, he will not want to be connected with the sex selling business. So being in a business, sex selling business, he is cut off all these kind of weak ties that could be connected into society. because you have been too long time in the sex selling industry. And so what kind of he get? Yeah, well, if he says like, well, I need some job, maybe there will be one man say, well, you can get in my video shop, or maybe you could do something, but they will all be in the sex industry. So the problem is, it's not like only in the person that you are affected by selling sex. It's like when you are staying too long time in this activity, your social capital will be only there, and you will not have any possibility to get outside. And that will be in every shutdown and lockdown activity. If you are in a rural group or in a little organization or a sect, will also be closed down. It's very hard to get out from it. So the next, please. So using the concept of social capital in a individual level, that limits the nation's scope of his business to find new possibility for him. And he can't use the social capital in sex trade industry to provide opportunities for work outside the sex selling activity. And that's, again, one we have to work on many levels, on a personal level, on a group level, on a society level, about stigmatization, discrimination, and also about this work, but also for LGBTI people and people who have different ability, ethnicity, gender difference, and transsexuality, etc. So let me, to the end, say something about how to work with this as out of my experience. Please, next store. So I can think about, sorry, it's dry in Sweden. You can see when we are social worker, we meet our client, it's like talk is, you can see it like a door. We knock and on a person's and it opened and we can enter. And otherwise, if we don't open, we can't enter. A lot of times we want to enter without any opening the door, but the thing is we have to wait. The door may be the press moved. And one thing I have thought about, and I found out during my experience and what I've written in the book, Sorry, still only Swedish, Social Work and Sexuality, is that we have to ask one more question about sexuality. Most questions we meet with our patients or clients and so on are regarding sexuality, but most of them, due to the stigmatization and victimizations, don't want to bring that up. But if we open up and say, well, what about sexuality? I find that the question is so easy to say. What about sexuality? And I leave them to say, yes, that's what I want to say. Oh, what do you mean by that? No, I can say, but that's a question we always ask in social service. But mostly they would say, yes, that is a problem. That is a problem. And when we have this sex selling man in front of us, as we see in the beginning of our slides, it's not only maybe the problem of vulnerability of selling sex that is the main issue. The main issue could be actually being thrown out, no place to go, no work to do. Those are the issues they want to have addressed. And if we are open for that, we can address them. And when they are addressed, the sex selling activity are gone. So the life is like a corridor with doors on both ways. And we can ask our clients or patient, well, can I go into the next room? And if we do that, we can have the same pace and we can talk about that. But we have to stay here and there always. So the next slide, please. So what we have to consider is to promote a positive sexual identity development for people. As I said, for everyone is a human right perspective to have a positive sexual development. And that is we have to address bad upbringing, bad sexual abuse in upbringing, bad sexual abuse on the street, on the societal level, in organizational level, all levels, and we have to promote good ones. We have to promote diversity and pluralism in meeting with the individual. Helping the individual to be well-founded decision is when it comes to sex and risky behavior. So we had to talk about them. Well, how do you think about this? What is the possibility? And we have to support the people their decision to come out or not, or to leave the business or not. So it can't be, well, if you come to the social service, you have to hide your LGBTI identity, and you have to leave the sexual industry. We have to counteract all the form of discrimination, and that can be hard, different too, but we have to do one step at a time and have a holistic view of the individual life. That means it's economical, socially, physical, mentally, and in the way they live in the society. And then lastly, we have to normalize and dare to stick around to listen. Often so people want to talk, but I can see that as a social worker, I become a little bit nervous when I talk, they're going to talk about sex. Well, you haven't to do anything. My advice is just sit back and let them talk, because that is health. A lot of people haven't been heard. They need somebody to listen to them. And please, as a social worker, I said that wherever we are a social worker, we need to listen. So my last slide will be that allowing the individual to go in their own pace. We can't say you have to take this step at the same time or as us. You have to take the step in your pace, in your as you want to. But I will be there. Henry David Thoreau, an American activist and so on, he said, if a man does not keep pace with his companion, perhaps it's because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measure or far away. And finally, it's very important to have a human right perspective. And I think that's one of the reasons that KA's organization in Turkey do this kind of presentations, because it's about every person in the world have the right to live and have the right to be seen and right to be heard, and have to have good upbringing, social welfare, but also sexual welfare in a good way. So I hope this presentation in some way have given you some thoughts about how to work with a sex seller or male, and then we can have some questions and so. That is my name and my university, and I forgot my email, but you can take contact with the KAOS organization, or you can find me in LinkedIn or in Facebook. That's easy. And I would love to have all your friends from Turkey. Thank you very much.
Sevgili Hans, öncelikle tekrar çok teşekkürler. Yani bu sunumda pek çok soru ve bilgi paylaştın bizimle tekrar. Birlikte düşünebilmek için. Ben ufak böyle bazı noktaları hatırlatmaya çalışacağım. Senin kadar böyle derinlemesine olmasa bile. Biraz kültürel tarih teorilerinden girip aslında insanların eylemlerinin, ilişkilerin, oluşturdukları bağla bir değişim ve dönüşüm ortamı yarattığına vurgu yaparak bir başlangıç, bir zemin döşedin bizi. Değişmeyen tek şey değişme cümlesini hatırlattı söylediklerim bana. Ve bir taraftan da Ethan üzerinden bize bir erkek seks işçisinin yaşamındaki değişim dönüşümünü gösterme fırsatı buldun. Bu arada beni çok etkileyen nokta, yani genel olarak araştırmaları biz anlık bir fotoğraf gibi çekiyoruz ama Ethan'ın 10 yıl boyunca yaşadıklarına tanıklık etmek ve bunlara böyle bir şekilde anlam vermek çok daha farklı. Bu yüzden teşekkürler öncelikle. Özellikle Ethan'dan başlarken çocukluğundan da başladığında benim hemen böyle soru işaretlerinden biri bir çocuk koruma sistemi acaba nerelerde müdahale edebilirdi diye bir soru oluştu. Arkasından kırılganlık, erkeklerin kırılganlığı ile ilişkili bir başlık altında savunmasızlık aşamaları ile ilişkili bir tanımlamaya girdin. Güvenli alanın ne kadar önemli olduğunu, şiddet ve baskı çeşitlerinin nasıl değişebildiğini, totaliter bir yaklaşımla aile içerisinde mesela veya ev içerisinde veya insan onuruna yönelik böyle ötekileştiren, yok sayan bir çöp gibi örneğin üzerinden değersizleştirdiğinde neler hissettirebileceğiyle ilişkili bir ayna tuttun bize. Bunun dışında özellikle cinselleştirilmiş şiddetle ilişkili örnekleri nasıl tasnif edebileceğimizle ilişkili çerçeve, hem fiziksel hem zihinsel, sembolik şiddet, bir de yapısal ve toplumsal olarak nasıl cinselleştirilmiş şiddeti tanımlayabileceğimizle ilişkili doneler de çok açıklayıcıydı. Ve bu arada seks işçiliği kavramının da sosyal yapının tanımlamasıyla ya bir utanç vericilik şeklinde bir ağırlık yapabileceğini, bunun da sosyal yapıyla çok ilişkili olduğuna dair tekrar bir hatırlatma yaptım. Bir seks hiyerarşisi içerisinde tanımlanan şekilde olmadığında nasıl aslında kırmızı bölgelerde tanımlanabileceğini, o Huni örneğinden de bize bir örnek verdin. Mesela evde değil, sokakta veya parkta cinsellik yaşandığında kırmızı alanlara geçiyoruz gibi. İşte para için yapıldığında kırmızı alanlara yapılıyor gibilerine o hiyerarşiyi gözümüzde canlandırmamızı sağladın. Bir taraftan da sosyal sermaye, özellikle seks işçiliğinde sosyal sermaye seks işçiliğiyle ilişkili çok güçlendiğini ve bir şekilde seks işçiliğini den farklı bir alana yöneldiğinde yaşanan zorluklarla ilişkili. Çünkü hani seks işçiliği aracılığıyla oluşan bir sosyal sermaye var ve bunu değiştirmek, dönüştürmek kişi için çok zorlaşabiliyor diyerekten bir noktaya böyle mercek oldun. Bizlerin bulunduğumuz yerden başlangıç olarak bir sosyal hizmet uzmanı olarak bir kapı göndermesiyle bir benzetme yaptın ve bu kapı aslında pek çok kapı var. Kapı her zaman açılamayabilir. Önce çalmamız gerekir. Belki pek çok soru sormamız gerekebilir. Bu sorulardan biri cinsellik olursa açıcı olabilir diye küçük tiyoların çok yol gösterici oldu. Şimdi ve burada ve belki de her kapının biricikliğiyle ilişkili biraz daha hazırlıklı olmamız gerektiğine dair bir bilgi verdin ve süreçte olağan hale getirme gibi ayrımcılıkla mücadele konusunda hazırlıklı olmamız gerektiğiyle ilişkili bir geri bildirimin oldu. Her kişinin kendi hızına göre aslında konumlanabileceğimizi ve bu noktada da insan hakları perspektifinden sapmamamız ile ilişkili böyle bir zemin döşedin. Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Birazdan soru cevap kısmına gireceğiz. Katılımcılarımız chat bölümünden yazmaya başlayacak. Ve oralara geçerken de YouTube yayınımız sona erecek. Sona ermeden ve sorulara geçmeden ben tekrar bu etkinliğin, bu buluşmanın, bu çok anlamlı ve güçlendirici buluşmanın eşit hakları güçlendirme projesi kapsamında Avrupa Birliği desteğiyle yürüdüğünü ifade etmek isterim.